Hello, everyone. Hello,
Hello.
Riccardo. Welcome to the Institute for Mediterranean Studies and Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies Neoplatonic Lectures. We are very happy and honored that our speaker today is Professor Riccardo Chiaradonna, whom we thank again for accepting the invitation. Riccardo Chiaradonna needs no introduction. However, as custom has it, I will just say a few words before giving you the floor, Riccardo. So Riccardo Chiaradonna is full professor of ancient philosophy at University of Roma Tre. As we all know, his research focuses on Neoplatonism and the commentators, but he is more generally interested in topics in metaphysics and epistemology as well. And something that I did not know before having a look at your CV, in early modern philosophy as well. So besides Rome, he has been a visiting professor around Europe at the Scuola Galileiana in Padua, at the Sorbonne, the CNRS, the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, at the Institute for Classical Studies in London and elsewhere. And he is the holder of many distinguished appointments as well. I think that currently he is the president of the Italian Society for the History of Ancient Philosophy. He is member of the editorial or advisory board of journals such as Methexis or Oxford Studies in Ancient Philosophy, and editor-in-chief of Hellenistic. Concerning his publications, it is true that the quantitative approach is not always representative of one's contribution, but I think that knowing who Riccardo Chiaradonna is and the importance of his work, it is meaningful to say that he is author or editor, co-editor of 18, I think, books, of more than 45 papers, more than 90 book chapters. And I will just say perhaps 5 titles of his books that I have chosen in Italian, English, or French. Sostanza, Movimento, Analogia, Plotino critico di Aristotele, Napoli, Bibliopolis, 2002. Platonismo, Bologna, Il Mulino, 2017. Boethos de Sidon, Exégète d'Aristote philosophe, together with Marwan Rased, in the Greuter, 2020. Il problema della normatività nel pensiero antico, together with Loredana Cardulo, Roma, edizioni di Storia e Letteratura, 2022. And of course, in 2023, Ontology in Early Neoplatonism in the Greuter. So to me, Riccardo, your writings are silent teachers. But today, we have the luck of having you here and of being able to listen to you on common notions from Plotinus to Iamblichus. So I stop here, and please, the floor is yours. Thank you again for...
Thank you very much, Irini, for this very generous introduction. I'm a bit ashamed of this introduction, and I would like to thank you for organizing this seminar, for having me here. I'm very happy to share with you and for those in this Zoom meeting some ideas about common notions in Neoplatonism from Plotinus to Iamblichus. What I am going to talk about is partly connected to the recent book on ontology in early Neoplatonism and partly different from what I try to show in that book. Let me try to share a handout. Okay, it's maybe better to share the handout so that I can point to the passages during my paper. Okay, I will start from T5. This is the first chapter on Plotinus treatise 3.7 on eternity and time, and here Plotinus sets out his method of research. And I would suggest that we can distinguish at least 4 stages in Plotinus' argument. First of all, in inquiring about eternity and time, Plotinus starts pointing to the opinions about time and eternity that we all share and on which the use of these terms is based. So the starting point is, so to speak, everyday language, ordinary language. Plotinus seems to assume that we have some kind of ordinary, non-philosophical beliefs about eternity and time. Eternity pertains to the sempiternal nature, while time pertains to what comes to be and to this universe. I will not focus on details of these first lines. Note that we have here these words, aphroterais epiboliais. Some scholars suggest that this is an allusion to Epicurus' epistemology. I'm rather inclined to think that Plotinus is here drawing on Galen, but I would not dwell on this. So the first stage of research is represented by ordinary pre-philosophical beliefs. And we use our words in everyday language, and when we ordinarily talk about eternity and time, we are basically using language and some kind of philosophical notions about these items. However, since this is a mere pre-philosophical awareness of eternity and time, we find some perplexity when we are asked to account for the real nature of time and eternity. We are in some kind of aporia, so to speak. So when we try to move from a preliminary to some kind of philosophical or scientific account of eternity and time, we have the experience of some kind of difficulty. We are capable of using these terms in everyday language, but we are not capable of providing a real definition of eternity and time. By the way, this passage is more or less in the background of Augustine's famous remarks about time. So we all talk about time, but we are not able to define it when we are asked to do so. So after this aporia, the different, this is the aporia. And when we focus on the aporia, then we find that different views of the ancients of eternity and time can offer, at least in part, a solution to our perplexity. So in order to grasp the nature of eternity and time, we could therefore choose to follow one of the doctrines already advanced, and we could stop there without pursuing the research. Plotinus regards, so that's what he says. Plotinus, however, regards such an approach as insufficient. He recognizes that some among the ancient philosophers have discovered the truth, but this is not enough. This does not exempt us from examining who are those who have maximally grasped it and how we ourselves can attain an understanding of these matters. Of course, there is a hierarchy among the older doctrines, and Plotinus is a Platonist, and Plato's doctrines have an eminent position vis-a-vis all others' views. So, in a sense, the critical discussion of the ancients leads to the conclusion that Plato is right, so to speak. But that said, Plotinus does not simply follow Plato, and it does not simply appeal to his authority. Instead, he says that it is only the discussion of the doctrines proposed by the ancients that leads us to a genuine understanding of what we are now investigating. And without such an examination, and this is a crucial point, without such a critical dialectical examination, so to speak, there would be no genuine philosophical research. So parroting Plato, so to speak, is not enough. Another interesting passage is T4. It is the beginning of the second part of Plotinus' treatise about intelligible beings and their unity in sensible items. There, Plotinus mentions a common notion, koine ennoia, koinetetis ennoia, concerning the intelligible and divine being. So, as he says, a common conception says that really is such a thing as being one and the same in number, simultaneously present as a whole everywhere. And everyone is spontaneously, out of huios, moved to say that the God present in each of us is one and the same. That's somehow interesting and, in a sense, somehow disconcerting at the same time. Plotinus is fairly convinced that we all share unanimously and indisputably a common belief about God, i.e. that divine being is one and the same while being everywhere. As he says in the following part of this chapter, it is instead reason, logos, that questions the truth of these beliefs. So in a sense, if we stick to the common beliefs without further inquiring about it through logos, we would not run the risk to deviate vis-a-vis the genuine preliminary belief about God. Thus, here Plotinus suggests that we should better avoid philosophical research and stop at a common belief. Of course not. We should not, of course, infer from these lines that Plotinus rejects the critical examination through logos. In a sense, without logos, there would simply be no philosophy at all, and it would be impossible to attain genuine knowledge. So without logos, one would remain confined to pre-philosophical knowledge of and common notions. However, the logos is at the same time necessary to develop genuine philosophy and, in a sense, risky, because the logos brings risk with it, because it can also deviate from this kind of pre-philosophical truth. So we need to submit the arguments provided to rigorous scrutiny, and we have to select those which really lead to the genuine knowledge of the intelligible being, while rejecting arguments that have in themselves a spurious appearance of truth, and in fact, they are not true at all. So in those passages both of them refer to some kind of pre-philosophical knowledge about eternity, time, and God, and both of these passages regards this pre-philosophical knowledge, these pre-philosophical beliefs as the starting point for further research. Then we, of course, we could raise the question, whence do we get these pre-philosophical beliefs? Well, in 371, Plotinus does not explain this. So it does not explain whence we get the concepts of eternity and time, which underlie ordinary linguistic use. Certainly, such concepts are somehow in us, so they are in our soul. However, scholars diverge about their origin. Some scholars suggest that these are inborn, innate concepts in the soul, and their origin lies in the soul's preliminary acquaintance with intelligible beings. Other scholars instead, and they emphasize Plotinus' use of athroteres epipolais, which may point to Epicurus' epistemology. Some other scholars tend to suggest that those preliminary beliefs, at least the preliminary belief about time, are drawn from sensory experience. In fact, in the last part of the treatise, Plotinus actually says that we derive our ennoia of time from the observation of celestial motions. So this would, in a sense, lend support to the interpretation that the ennoia of time is drawn from experience. That said, it is also true that where Plotinus says that we draw the notion of time from celestial motion, is not really talking about the notion of time in itself, and Plotinus emphasizes that time in itself is connatural to the soul and independent of bodies. He is rather talking about the quantitatively measured concept of time determined by celestial motions. In other words, Plotinus seems to suggest that while the concept of time is connatural to us, the quantitative measurement of time, of a certain span of time, requires the observation of celestial bodies. Well, I will, of course, come back to these issues in the rest of my paper. Now I would like to have some kind of flashback about Plotinus' philosophical background. So, and I think that some remarks about Plotinus' philosophical background shed light on these passages. Well, the term ennoia, conception, notion, is well attested in Plato, of course, but it is characteristically connected with Hellenistic debates, and more precisely with the Stoic common notions or common conceptions. What are common notions according to the Stoic? Well, according to the Stoics, our cognitive system are providentially structured, so to speak, and certain notions arise in every individual regardless of experience and circumstance. So common notions are starting points for inquiry, and if properly developed or articulated, they serve as criteria of truth. In other words, common conceptions are criteria for judging the truth and falsity of propositions. So they function, when properly articulated, as touchstones in arguments. Note that this view does not really entail that common conceptions are inborn contents, but what the Stoic view really entails that we have inborn natural capacities, and that these capacities make it possible for individuals to form common conceptions starting from what individuals perceive. Furthermore, the Stoic, at least originally, Stoic common conceptions are common, not so much because they are actually agreed by all. This is not the original Stoic view, at least this is probably not the original Stoic view. They are common because they are shared by all individuals de jure, so to speak. That is, insofar as all individuals possess their natural capacity for understanding. But this natural capacity is, however, in most cases distorted, so that individuals hold erroneous beliefs. So that said, the Stoic view often came to be equated with the appeal to common consensus, so the consensus omnium, and in a sense, the same holds for later elaborations of these theories. So references to the Stoic common view notions are quite common, so to speak, from in philosophers from the 1st century BC to the early 3rd century CE. And these debates form the background for Plotinus and later Neoplatonists. Here I would point to some passages from Galen, the doctor and philosopher Galen, who regards common conceptions as starting points for attaining scientific medical knowledge. So Galen suggests that knowledge starts with commonly shared common conceptions which underlie ordinary linguistic practice and are conveniently expressed in conceptual definitions. For example, the conceptual definition of disease or that of pulse. Here we have two passages about that. The conceptual definition provides a clear interpretation of the ordinary conception of the thing possessed by those who are capable of naming it, as Galen says in T2, which is a passage from his work on the differences of pulse, and there we have a long section on different kinds of definitions. These views are connected with Galen's account of natural criteria, which are physical and physiological capacities shared by all individuals, in virtue of which they're able to understand the world they inhabit. So such capacities are inborn and grant that common conceptions derived from perception are the same for all. Galen emphasizes that the conceptual definition is the necessary starting point for attaining the essential definition, the logos ousiodes, which explains the very essence of the thing sought. Of course, the analysis of ordinary language does not suffice to attain the essential definition, and which requires methodical use of the two sources of scientific knowledge, i.e., perception and intellect. Note that nothing points to recollection, to Platonic recollection in these passages from Galen. But another interesting chapter concerning the reception of the Stoic common notions is distinctively Platonic. Platonist authors such as Alcinous, say 2nd century, but the chronology of Alcinous is very uncertain, or the anonymous Theocritus commentator, well, these Platonist authors regard natural conceptions as inborn traces of the soul's pre-existent knowledge of the forms. Both of them identify, therefore, natural conceptions with the memories of the ideas, memories that should be awakened or articulated in order to attain proper knowledge. The mere possession of natural conceptions, enoia, is therefore different from their full activation, anakinein, as Alcinous says, or articulation. Probably Alcinous and other Platonists regarded the Stoic view as compatible with Platonism if indeed the Stoic view is appropriately supplemented by recollection. And Plutarch provides further evidence of this fact in a fragment where he presents common conceptions as the Stoic answer to Minos' paradox. Of course, these remarks about Platonists and common notions raise the questions of whether, for such Platonists, concept acquisition is based on recollection. So, do these passages about concept acquisition and recollection and common notion point to a view according to concept acquisition is always based on recollection? Well, in a sense, much militates against this very strong conclusion, and the crucial objection is that Platonists before Plotinus did not posit ideal correlates for many items we have concepts of. So there are no ideas of bad things, for example, of artifacts, and so on, of individuals, and so on and so on. So since we have concepts of something with no ideal correlate, it is quite implausible that they regarded recollection of separate forms as involved in all processes of concept acquisition. You have a nice passage from George Boystow's Platonist philosophy about this. Perceptual properties, for example, have no idea correlata. So if we have the concept of green or blue, we are not recollecting the form of green or the form of blue. This is certainly quite plausible. That said, at least in some privileged situations, possibly at least with some kind of concepts, or at least with some kind of concept acquisition, recollection is necessary. So it is quite true that recollection is not involved in all processes of concept acquisition. That's quite true, but I would not downplay the role of recollection in all concept acquisition. After all, those guys were no empiricists at all, and we should not make of Alcinous or of Plotinus some crypto-empiricists. Okay. I would now come back to Plotinus. So, did Plotinus regard all, once again, I would raise the same question. Did Plotinus regard all concept acquisition as based on recollection? Probably not. There are passages, for example, in Treatise 5.3, where Plotinus points to sensory experience and memory as necessary conditions for concept acquisition, at least in the weak sense that sensory experience is a necessary prerequisite for concept acquisition. And once again, as Plotinus says in 5.9, there are no ideal correlata for certain concepts. So bad things, many of the artifacts, and so on, and so on. So at least in some instances, concept acquisition is entirely based on experience. That said, I would resist against minimizing the importance of inborn concepts in Plotinus' account of knowledge. And I would suggest that time, eternity, and this account of God are precisely beliefs which cannot really be based on experience, and they are rather based on our own incorporeal and a priori, so to speak, nature. They are connatural to us insofar we are intelligible beings. And of course, this passage from 6.5 points to the same direction, since Plotinus contends that all individuals have a concept of God in themselves, and that cannot be drawn from experience, in a sense, precisely because this concept goes against common sense, so to speak. So at least I would say that at least in some privileged situation, we have common beliefs, and these common beliefs reveal some kind of pre-philosophical acquaintance with non-empirical principles. And of course, the philosophical inquiry develops the inborn notions, and what lies at the start of the research is no empirical concept, but an inborn and preliminary trace in our soul of the very intelligible beings of which philosophy aims at providing a full account. So we start from an inborn trace, which is preliminary and not wrong. We have to develop this trace, and this is risky because we can develop this trace in a good or in a wrong way, but this risk is necessary because without this dialectical discussion, no philosophy, no real philosophy would occur. And if a research is pursued in the appropriate way, then at the end we have a full knowledge of the same issues involved at the beginning. But whereas at the beginning we only had a preliminary belief, what we have at the end is a full philosophical account. This is more or less Plotinus' idea of philosophical method. Let's now move to Porphyry. And as you may remember, I said at the beginning of my paper that, in my view, this words Atheoteres and Bibolais do not really point to Epicurus, but there is an interesting parallel in Galen for this expression in a context which is similar to that in this chapter, and they're rather inclined to suggest that Plotinus is here drawing on Galen, which is not an isolated situation in Plotinus Treatise 3.7. What is interesting is that we have a fragment from Porphyry, more precisely from Porphyry's Lost Commentary on the Categories, the section on quality, This fragment is in Iamblichus, and in that fragment, Porphyry employs the same distinction between conceptual and essential definition we find in Galen, so in T2. I'm inclined to think that Galen's last treatise on demonstration was among those philosophical works used in Plotinus' school. Well, Porphyry follows Galen's distinction between conceptual and essential definition in this passage. Here, Porphyry contrasts conceptual and essential definition, and as is the case with Galen, he claims that the conceptual and pre-scientific definitions are commonly agreed by all individuals. So, as you can see, they are agreed by all. And this is a starting point of research. The antithesis of views is involved in essential definitions. Once again, different schools, different philosophical schools, differently develop the pre-philosophical notion about, say, soul or sound or some other items. Of course, this distinction, the distinction between the conceptual definition and the essential definition, combines the Stoics and also Aristotle's vocabulary, for example, in particular, the distinction between nominal definition and real definition in the posterior analytics. Well, the underlying idea is that our ordinary knowledge is based on conceptions agreed upon by everybody, and that, once again, conceptual definitions reflect these ordinary beliefs. These are non-technical, preliminary, and incomplete, but they are agreed upon by everyone. And they are not false, they are only incomplete, so to speak. Are common notions based on perception. This was the Stoic view, this was Galen's view. Note that Porphyry does not mention perception. So it is at least an open question if he regards the common notions as based on perception or, say, by the pre-philosophical traces of some kind of pre-philosophical inborn knowledge in us. It doesn't really explain the issue, but whereas Galen is quite clear that common notions are drawn from perception, Porphyry doesn't really explain whence we get those notions. And there is another difference vis-a-vis Galen. Galen does not refer to diverging philosophical views about essential definitions. What he says is that we start from notions drawn from perception, and then the good doctor, through the intellect and the experience, appropriately develops these common notions. So at the end of this process, we have the scientific definition. What Porphyry says is, in a sense, based both on Galen and Plotinus. He says that we start from some kind of preliminary account. We don't know whence we get it. And then different schools differently develop this account. So we have to check their arguments, we have to check their diverging view, and it is precisely this debate, this dialectical debate, according to which we compare different views and we assess which is the best one, that is Plato's one. It is precisely this dialectical debate which grants genuine philosophy. Without this debate, we have no real philosophy. And these issues emerge from some other passages. These are some kind of under-investigated passages, but I think they are quite interesting. All of them are preserved in the same section from Eusebius, Preparatio Evangelica. There Eusebius mentions, quotes a series of passages from Porphyry in order to show that there is diaphonia, so that there is disagreement among Greek philosophers, which in a sense strange, because in a sense we all associate Porphyry with the universalizing view according to which all Greek philosophers more or less agree. In a sense, this is somewhat strange because these passages quoted by Eusebius emphasize disagreement among the Greeks. And that's why Eusebius is quite happy to quote these passages, and he says, look, Porphyry shows that there is agreement among the Greek, and we have to embrace Christianism in order to escape these unwelcome consequences. I would like now to show if we can make sense of these passages against the background outlined so far. So the first two passages, T7 and T8, are taken from Porphyry's letter to Anibo. So the letter, the fictional letter addressed to this fictional Egyptian Anibo, which is in fact Porphyry's manifesto against Iamblichus' theology. According to Safrey and Segon, T7 comes from the beginning of this work, whereas T8 comes from the end. I'm rather inclined to think that both of these passages come from the beginning of Porphyry's letter to Anibo. Then we have this passage T9, which comes from Porphyry's lost work on the soul against the peripathetic Boethus. And then we have T10. T10 comes from the philosophy from oracles, and more precisely from the first book of this work, as some parallels show. Well, as I just said, all of these passages emphasize the existence of disagreement among the Greeks and the weakness of their knowledge. And in T7, the first one, Porphyry goes so far as to say that the proofs provided by the philosophers result from mere conjecture, ek stochasmou, which is a quite disparaging, apparently, assessment. Of course, these remarks lend support to Eusebius' polemical remarks against the Greeks' logomachy, so to speak. And Porphyry's attitude is somehow so surprising, since his remarks suggest that Greek philosophy involves disagreement, involves diaphonia, and therefore is inferior to other traditions. And this is precisely the conclusion drawn by Eusebius. Upon closer investigation, however, something different emerges. And I think what emerges is quite consistent with what we have outlined so far. Plotinus does not regard agreement without debate and rational investigation as an ideal to be pursued. And this is shown by the T8, where he says, as for those who have brought about union with the higher being, if they have disregarded the investigation of this part of theology, then it is in vain that they practice wisdom. And you can see the parallel with another passage from Eusebius, and Safrey Segon showed that both passages are connected, where Porphyry says that if we escape human reasoning, we have no real theology, we have no real access to truth and to happiness. What we have is some kind of superstition, and this is Porphyry's reproach to Iamblichus. Here, I will not read these remarks by Safrey Segon, but I think they're quite right in outlining Porphyry's approach. When Porphyry opposes the Greeks and the Egyptians, in a sense, he emphasizes that Greeks disagree, but at the same time, it is only through dialectical debate, so through the risk of disagreement, that we can attain a genuine understanding of the issues. And we otherwise, what we attain is not real truth. It's only a mere appearance of truth, and in a sense, it is. I would like to emphasize this fact. It is exactly Plotinus' approach. When Plotinus says, okay, we could stop here, we could simply stop research and give up inquiring any further about this matter, but in this way, we don't find the truth. We need dialectic, we need dialectical debate, we have to assess different views in order to genuinely attain a philosophical understanding of what we are looking for. Okay. Here, I would like now to rapidly focus on this passage, T11, which has been recently translated by Gert Freudenthal and Aaron Johnson in the Colossical Quarterly. It's preserved by a medieval Hebrew philosopher, and it is a strange quotation from Porphyry, where Porphyry, as you can see, emphasizes that we have to inquiry views which seem strange, and we should not refrain from inquiring such views. We have no idea about the source of this passage. I would venture to suggest that this passage may come from Porphyry's lost history of philosophy. This history of philosophy, Porphyry's lost history of philosophy, was known in the medieval Arabic world, and it might well be a quotation from Porphyry's history of philosophy, where, in a sense, Porphyry outlines the methods we have been outlining so far, so that we have to go through different doctrines, even those which seems to be strange, and that we only attain truth if we pursue this dialectical inquiry, which involves doubts, involves conjecture, but we cannot avoid this. Let's now go back to T9. This is the passage from Porphyry's Against Boethus, and in a sense, it is similar to the passages from the letter to Anibo. We have, of course, once again, the conceptions, the ennoiai, and in a sense, what he says, this is a truncated quotation, so we don't really know the full context, but we can, of course, shed some light on the content of this passage. Once again, Porphyry says there is some evidence, some pre-philosophical evidence drawn from the ennoia and from history, and this pre-philosophical evidence establishes indisputably that the soul is immortal. So, that the soul is immortal is one of those pre-philosophical beliefs, possibly traces of some inborn knowledge in us, and they are certainly true. But the arguments brought forward by philosophers for demonstration seem easy to overturn on account of the ability of the heuristics in founding arguments on every subject. What argument in philosophy is not disputed by those who hold different opinions, since some thought that it fits to suspend judgment even about matters which seem to be evident? I would like to emphasize the tois heterodoxois, so philosophers of different views, because we find the very same term in Simplicius quotations. Of course, I cannot find here. Here we are, eupoton and heterodoxon. So it was some kind of standard way of arguing in Porphyry. We start from some commonly shared views, and then we have the risk of having false demonstrations, conjectures, and of course, so that if we are not well prepared, we come to doubt even about evident matters, such as the soul's immortality. So, as in Iamblichus' passage, Porphyry defines the preliminary and agreed knowledge about the soul, and he says that the enoi and history indisputably establish that the soul is immortal. Note that in Iamblichus, Porphyry mentions soul is the source of life as the conceptual definition of the soul, and at this level there is no disagreement. The disagreements come later when different schools differently developed this common conception. And this disagreement calls for a critical investigation of the doctrines brought forward by philosophers in order to establish which are better than others, which is what Plotinus wants to suggest at the beginning of 3.7. So here we find a work. What we find at work here is Plotinus' method in 3.7.1. So in sum, Porphyry says that the critical discussion of philosophical doctrines of the soul shows the superiority of Plato's position, but we cannot simply say that Plato is better. We have to, if we really want to understand that the soul is immortal, we have to go through the wrong views put forward by philosophers, and that's what Porphyry did in his lost treatise against the peripatetic Boethus of Sidon. Boethus was a, so to speak, materialist peripatetic, and he had criticized Plato's theories of the soul in the Phaedo. As we can argue from the extant evidence, Porphyry makes two reproaches against Boethus. First, his theory of the soul as entelechy implies that the soul is mortal and makes it a mere quality inherent in body. So, in showing that the soul is a mere quality inherent in body and mortal, Boethus' arguments overturn the truth attested by enoi and history. In criticizing Plato's Phaedo, furthermore, Boethus rejects the true doctrine of the soul, that which regards the soul as an immortal substance and really agrees with common conception. So according to its true essential definition, soul is in fact a self-moving substance, whereas Boethus misleadingly compared the soul to qualities, and not to some kind of self-moving substance. Note that in a passage, Porphyry explicitly says that Boethus is wrong in questioning Plato's arguments. So he didn't recognize that Plato's arguments are good. And once again, we really attain the truth about the soul when we go through Boethus' false demonstrations and show that Plato's arguments in the Phaedo are the right ones. In a sense, I cannot go into details, but basically Porphyry says if the soul has certain activities, then these activities require a certain substance. And Boethus admits that soul has these kinds of activities, but he rejects that soul is a divine substance. So since he rejects the equivalence between substance and activities, his arguments are wrong. His arguments are false demonstrations. So this is in a sense some kind of a survey of Plotinus of Porphyry's account. Of course, there are some kind of possible objections. For example, we all know that Porphyry composed two works, emphasized the harmony between Plato and Aristotle. So how can Porphyry's views about the harmony of Plato and Aristotle be compatible with his criticism against Boethus and with his emphasis about conjectures, antitheses, and on dialectical assessment of antitheses? But I think that this background lead us to reconsider that we have two titles about Porphyry's work on Aristotle. One about the harmony of Plato and Aristotle, and one about the disagreement. Maybe the Porphyry just wrote one single work on Plato and Aristotle, but the agreement between the two philosophers was not complete, and especially on the soul, Porphyry was prepared to recognize this agreement between the two masters of Greek philosophy, and this disagreement was in a sense necessary to properly develop philosophy. Okay, now I will rapidly move to the end of my paper and to the last passage, which is a passage in Iamblichus' reply to Porphyry, traditionally called the Mysteries, where Iamblichus, at the beginning of his work, strongly rejects Porphyry's method. Why? Because in talking about gods, Porphyry employs methods which, as Iamblichus says, are only appropriate to human views. And he treats the beliefs about God as merely human views about gods and the divine hierarchy. Here I've quoted I've not quoted Safrey and Segon edition but the old edition by the Plus, because Safrey and Segon changed the text, and I think it is not completely justified. Note that we have this verb at the beginning, didonai, conceit. So Porphyry talks about gods as a thesis to be conceded, and that's what Iamblichus rejects. That then didomi and cognate words come back again in this passage, and they refer once again to some kind of concession, agreement of views that can be discussed. In a sense, what Iamblichus rejects is the idea that in talking about gods, we merely discuss human views, and we don't base our account on the symphytos katanoesis, on the innate understanding of gods. So through his dialectical method, and the dialectical method is precisely the method outlined in these fragments. So there are conjectures, antitheses. Let's go through conjectures about gods and their hierarchy. Porphyry unduly regards truths about God as human truths that can be discussed dialectically. And this is, of course, a wrong position, which does not recognize the unshaken, innate cognition of gods. I would end my paper with a remark which is also some kind of a question. It's not quite clear to me. Why does Porphyry in his letter to Anibo merely mention these conjectures and disagreement? So as we have said, as we have seen, Plotinus and Porphyry's method starts with some inborn belief, which may somehow be similar to the symphytos katanoesis mentioned in Iamblichus. Then there is some kind of disagreement among those who have different views. So we have some kind of philosophical discussion, and at the end we establish truth through this discussion. Apparently, in his letter to Anibo, Porphyry didn't mention some kind of inborn common notion about the divine and the hierarchy. He started his discussion from the second step, i.e. from discussion of diverging views about gods. Why so? Why didn't he mention the symphytos ennoia about gods that can lead to truth in our inquiry about God? Maybe because this was some kind of polemical work, and in a sense, that's why Porphyry isolated the critical examination of antithetical views, rather than pointing to the common conception of God. What could be Porphyry's common conception of God? I think basically Plotinus' common conception, that is that God is some kind of substance which is one and the same while being identical in many, and possibly this common conception was not apt to be shown in his letter to Anibo, since those diverging views about gods are those which are removed from the common notions, rather than those which are consistent with it. I have no precise answer to this predicament. Still, I think that the background of this passage in Porphyry, in Iamblichus, is emphasis against Porphyry that we should stick to the Symphytus catanoesis, could be interpreted as some kind of ad hominem criticism. So you, Porphyry, who claim that we should start research with the Symphytus, with the Ennoia, you don't mention the Symphytus catanoesis of God in your work, and Porphyry had maybe some reason not to mention the common notions about gods in his letter to Anibo. Okay, that's the end of my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. So this is the time for questions or remarks. Yes, please, Yorgos Pikrakis. You can also turn on your camera if you like.
Hello.
Hello.
Professor Chiaradonna, grazie molto per la sua presentazione. Mi è piaciuto moltissimo. So I would like to give some note. What struck me most was the idea of knowing the divine essence, and I instantly thought the treatise on cult images of Porphyry. There's the starting line where he's supposedly to quote some excerpt lines from a lost Orphic poem that says, okay, I'll speak to those who are capable of understanding, and that's lawful to understand. And the rest of you just close the door and just stay outside. So I was thinking that this group of Vevili that he quotes might be some, intellectual opponents of his. So I think he just excludes a group of people, a group of thinkers, and I believe that when he's about to talk about divine essence, so I think that would be relevant to your study. What do you think about that?
In my way, I mean, thank you very much. I should look at that passage, of course. There is, in a sense, some kind of a double approach in Porphyry. On the one hand, is quite willing to study oracles in details and so on and so on. On the other hand, he has a quite intellectualist approach, which is close to Plotinus. In a sense, Plotinus didn't want to go to temples, as Porphyry says in his Life of Plotinus, had a different approach, which is, in a sense, fully intellectualistic, so to speak. On the other hand, Porphyry was at the same time very interested in the traditional cults, while being at the same time indebted to Plotinus intellectualism. Whereas, for example, Joseph Bidez had suggested that we have two different stages in Porphyry's development: an early stage indebted to traditional religion and a later stage indebted to Plotinus intellectualism, which is maybe possible. We don't know anything about that. But at the same time, I think that outline some kind of consistent picture, precisely because intellectualism is based on ordinary beliefs, but apparently Porphyry, while being interested in ordinary beliefs about gods and so on, and in the study of them as a necessary starting point for a genuine understanding, was at the same time suggesting that a genuine understanding can only be attained by the very few who are able to fully develop philosophy according to Plotinus' approach. I would suggest something like that. Well, it is quite possible, of course, that Porphyry moved from a religious to a metaphysical approach, but at the same time, I think that it's impossible to prove, first of all, and his emphasis about ordinary beliefs and the philosophical development of these beliefs, which can only be attained by a very few group of philosophers which are capable of fully developing their intellectual capacities. After all, Plotinus was an elitist. I mean, everybody is in principle able to attain full knowledge because everybody has a superior part of his or her soul in the realm of intelligible, but de facto, only a very few part of humans are able to achieve the, so to speak, the path from sensible realm to the genuine understanding of principle.
Only Plato, as he says in the sentences.
Only Plato and
only Plato
himself, yes.
Thank you very, very much. Grazie moltissimo.
Grazie. Grazie a lei.
Thank you for the hosting as well.
Thank you. Any other questions or remarks? So if there is none for the moment, I could perhaps step in. I have a couple of questions. The first one is about T7 and T8 on the handout. And there, the reference to machi, logomachia, and disagreement reminds me a little bit of Hierocles' reference to Ammonius Saccas' criticism of the battle, the machi, that there was among Alexandrian philosophers of his time. So could it be that Porphyry acknowledges that there is a lot of disagreement and machi and stasis within the, let's say, the philosophical community, and saying that this is a problem, but not, I mean, in the sense of criticizing it rather than...
Yes, especially because those passages are, I mean, it might well be that Porphyry was Hierocles' source in those passages about Ammonius. Is not quite so, but it's at least plausible. Not plausible is too much. It's possible that Porphyry was Hierocles' source. And that's a very good point. I haven't thought about that, but in a sense, those passages are consistent with these ones. I mean, Ammonius is a good philosopher and he has settled the disagreement, but at the same time, Ammonius' approach can only be developed through the discussion of the disagreement. That's, I think, Porphyry's point. And this could be, in a sense, a little bit far-fetched, but the thing is that Plotinus precisely says this at the beginning of 3.7. I think that in the background, we have Plotinus. Maybe Plotinus' method was Ammonius' method. We don't know anything about that. It might well be the case. We have to, in a sense, the where Plotinus says at the end of 3:7 text 5, he talks about the synesis we can have of those issues. It might be something like ammonius nous. We don't merely parrot the ancients, but through the discussion. So when Porphyry says in the life of Plotinus, he was able to read the text, but he didn't merely read the text in a, so to speak, philological way. Ammonius nous was always there. And in a sense, I think that this synesis, this nous, this points to the same issues, which involve a dialectical examination of diverging views, which I think this is after all some kind of Platonist approach. Through the aporia, we come to genuine understanding, which is more or less a Platonist approach applied to the exegesis of texts.
So yes, I understand. So you would say that ammonium nous is not simply the method of Ammonius, but it has something to do with that it was a technical term that had to do with the way Ammonius would reconcile different views through dialectic, and that synesis here is not only the understanding, but
I mean, it's all speculative, of course, but I think that all of these passages point to the same direction. That is that it is quite crucial to read the authorities, but I mean, my point is that we have a certain, there is a certain widespread view about Neoplatonists. Neoplatonists were Platonists, so they thought that Plato was right. So they had some kind of worship vis-a-vis Plato. So if they want to do philosophy, they only had to read Plato, and that's it. I don't think that this is what Plotinus and Porphyry suggest. They agree that Plato is more or less attained truth, okay, but in order to properly attain the truth, and attaining the truth is different from parroting Plato, especially because they were competing Platonists at their time. They had to show that they were in a sense better than others. So we have to go through diverging views and diverging beliefs. At the end of this exam involving the interpretation of text, we gain some genuine nous or synesis or whatever of the issues tackled. I think that's my point, in a sense, which is in a sense different from the idea that those guys regarded Plato as some kind of sacred work, and they merely they conceived of philosophy as merely reading this sacred work. I don't think this is the way in which Plotinus and Porphyry developed their philosophy.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can come back later because now Harold would like to.
Hello, Harold.
Hello, Riccardo. It was very nice to listen to you. Excellent work going on here. You'll probably not be surprised at my question if I tell you that on leaving a seminar in Cambridge on Monday, I managed to walk into a tree. I'm interested in the word epeke there at the end of your T9, and I'm not quite sure of precise what the precise thought that's going on here. One moment we get this this reference to tenen parsi huresilogian toneristikon, which brings sophistry in general to mind, but I know it can have a considerably wider application than that. And then you get the tisca logos tonen philosophia uk amphisbetesimos tois heterodoxois. So you've got people there lined up within the ranks of philosophy who are taking one side or the other. It doesn't seem to follow to me that there's a sense in the translation here. It's hopo in the Greek, which is perhaps slightly easier than the sense in the English, which suggests that there is a reason being given here, but it's in a situation in which even about those things which seem to be enargon, which might even suggest the common notions themselves with which you with which you began so competently there, and they seem to. It seems good to certain of them to abstain from them, to spend judgment. And I was wondering, do you think that epikein, with the use of epikein here, somebody like Porphyry is going to have specifically the New Academy in mind, or the New Academy plus the Pyrrhonians, or do you think it's a rather more general comment that's still being made about philosophers in general? Many of them, I mean, Galen himself, of course, was prepared to epike about the details of theology and psychology. So I just wondered whether you could clarify exactly how you're reading that those few lines.
Okay, thank you very much, Harold. Thank you so much. It's good to see you here. Well, as for the heuristics, I recognize that the capital E might possibly not appropriate. It might well be the case that Porphyry is not referring to some kind of heuristic school, but to those who put forward heuristic arguments. So maybe I would rather now not use the capital E. But so after all, I think that someone like Boethius of Sidon is, in a sense, an heuristic philosopher when talking about the soul, because there are some arguments in Plato which are perfectly sound, and Boethius says, no, they're not sound, and it tries to dismantle those good arguments. In a sense, he's behaving like an heuristic. As for the New Academy of the Pyrrhonians, my impression, if you look at the passage from Simplicius, then you have, for example, these examples of different definitions. Soul is self-moving substance, which is a Platonist definition. Then sound is air when impacted upon, and scholars have tried to find parallels for these definitions. My idea is that in his remarks about method, because all of these remarks are about method, Porphyry somehow freely draws from the previous tradition. So he feels free to draw from the previous tradition when this fits with his purpose. So I don't know if he's precisely referring to the New Academy or to the Pyrrhonians. I think you are perfectly right that in this passage, things which are evident are the common conceptions. For example, the soul's immortality. I think you are perfectly right. So they, and the basic idea that we have those common conceptions, they are perfectly evident. The history proves that they are evident, but we have heuristic arguments, we have diverging views, And well, I agree that since is too much, but it is a connected fact that people even suspend judgment on these matters. And so rather than a precise allusion to this or that passage or argument, I would rather point to some free incorporation of the previous tradition within its dialectical purposes. See, there are even skeptics about these beliefs, which is quite evident. And of course, I mean, this can be somehow inaccurate from a historical point of view, but it is, if you read the passage translated from the Hebrew by Johnson, that passage is again very general. It is as if Porphyry starts from an acquaintance with the previous tradition and draws some moral from this tradition. The moral is that, in a sense, in order to avoid misologia, once again, in a sense, a quotation from the Phaedo, we have to go through the argument, and we shouldn't be persuaded by misologia. We find our path through the argument at the end.
Excellent.
I think that's
yeah, that answers very well. Thank you.
Well, so thank you. May I come back with another question then? So this is a question about terminology.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering whether enia is the term that is always used, or if there are other words that sometimes are used for conception. I mean, epinia would be related, but it is quite, epinia is very precise when you read Porphyry, for example. It's,
yeah.
So I was wondering about, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. That's I must confess, I did no precise research about that. For example, in Iamblichus we have katanoesis, and I think that katanoesis is more or less equivalent to ennoia in that passage. By the way, they have no clear distinction between concepts and propositions. So sometimes we have hypolepsis rather than ennoia. Ennoia, I think, as the they are happy with ennoia because ennoia is in Plato too. So in a sense, it's that's why they have some kind of preference. For example, prolepsis is not so used, possibly because the prolepsis had some kind of Epicurean connotation or something like that. They prefer to use ennoia. Epinoia, as far as I know, is used in Porphyry when referring to abstraction, say in his commentary on the categories. Well, ennoia too, in his commentary on Ptolemy, is used to describe the abstraction, but apparently when Porphyry says at the beginning of the Isagoge, do species and genera are mere psilai epinoiai, and monas psilais epinoiais, their epinoia is abstraction, is not some inborn notion. So I think that there is a certain overlap. Still, ennoia has some kind of privilege because since it is in a sense in Plato, and it can be used to describe these inborn traits. For example, I have no idea of symphytos epinoia. I have no idea about that.
In the commentary on the Parmenides, which may not be Porphyry's, but which I think is possibly Porphyry's, yeah. There is the opinion of the one.
Okay.
So
I have to look at that, but it is in which context precisely?
I think the talking about I think it's column, I don't remember the name.
The first number. 2 columns, it's you ennoia tu henos. It looks almost as if we're dealing with ennoia tu henos rather than just with tohen.
Yes.
Sorry, with the ennoia or the epinoia?
Epinoia of the one, and I think in column later of God as well.
Okay.
I think both are used actually, if I remember rightly.
I think I'm quite old. I mean, I think there was a certain overlap of the two of different words. For example, Plotinus often says the enoia of time, the enoia of substance, and there is what he wants to say is the genuine notion, what the time really is. So there were different uses about these terms. I would, when talking about the inborn pre-philosophical beliefs or concept, as far as I know, enoia has some privileged status vis-a-vis other words. But I mean, I'm not completely sure. I didn't do any throughout research, but I think that enoia has some privileged status when talking about the inborn conception.
Yes, thank you. I also think that opinia is an abstraction, but then there must be different kinds of abstraction, in the sense that if there is, he also speaks in Sententia 44, he speaks about opinia, I think, of intellect.
Okay, but I think we have to look at the different passage in order
that would be the way we think of intellect. Yes,
I think epinoia was quite. I mean, I think that Porphyry has some kind of is fond of epinoia in a sense, possibly because epinoia was in debates around him. I don't know. In a sense, he's fond of scasis, he's fond of epinoia. There's a cluster of terms he is fond of. And of course, concepts of notion can play different roles in different contexts. When talking about the inborn notions, I think that enoia has a privileged status. That's my point, which is not, I mean, when, for example, in his commentary on Ptolemy, Porphyry talks about the enoia, well, there is talking about the abstraction of the form, which is not inborn. So that it is quite possible that enoia is used in different contexts too, but in those ones, I think that there's some kind of privileged status. Whereas, for example, prolepsis is not there. We would expect prolepsis, but prolepsis is not used in this context because possibly it was felt to be too empirical, so to speak.
Yes, and there is also this passage on Plotinus' union with the One, where Porphyry says that he assented diatonenion.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's and for example, it is quite common in Plotinus' criticism of Aristotle. Plotinus says Aristotle didn't grasp the enoia of ousia, didn't grasp the enoia of time, in the sense that he didn't grasp what time really is, what ousia really is. So that's another use you can find.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or remarks, or anyone who would like to step in? So if not, I think I would also stop, and I would just say thank you.
Thank you very much, Rini. Thank you, Harold, and thank you to the participants for your question, for being there.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I have learned a lot. And let us renew the appointment for the 7th of December and Adrien Lesser's talk on the automotricity of the soul in Porphyry and Macrobius.
Which is quite connected to my talk, because it's Porphyry's diverging view vis-a-vis Aristotle about the soul, in a sense, I suppose.
So hopefully we'll see each other again on the 7th of December. Thank you very much again, Riccardo, and to you all for the discussion.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.